Paul mentions in 2 Timothy 2:14 through 15, and there are several ways that you will see in various translations of how these thoughts are translated. But the idea is, in verse 14, warn them before God against quarreling about words, because it is of no value to those who listen, and it only ruins those who listen, one rendering says. But instead, do your best, or the King James Version says, study to show yourself approved unto God, a workman that does not need to be ashamed, rightly dividing or correctly handling the word of truth. And the idea that behind the word that's translated study is literally do your very best. Now, we think of study as, opening the book and formally sitting down at a table or a desk and actually studying. And that is studying, of course. But the concept here is to do your very best. Give your entire focus in to being someone who is approved of God. A workman or one who struggles with the word and knows how to correctly divide it, and the idea there is more like plowing it correctly or managing it in a way that's responsible. And so what we're confronted with is, how can you and I do that? Because the bottom line is, regardless of what we may feel and think and how we may view one another and the world about us, the bottom line is, what does God think of me as a person and of you as a person? And how can I please him? That is the most important question for all of us every day, is how can I please God? And since ancient times, followers of Christ have been presented with both the challenge and the responsibility to correctly handle his word. And so what I'm talking about in part is hermeneutics, of course. I'm sure you've heard that term. The Greek word Hermes, which actually referred to the mythological god of speech. He was the messenger god, and the word Hermes, or hermeneutics, from which the word comes actually, came to mean how to properly interpret a message, and not just simply to hear a message, but how do you properly interpret it. And my experience has been, and I'm sure your experience is, that I have family members, cousins, aunts, uncles, some close, some distant, that are members of various religious groups. I mean, I have that experience. And I don't know if you do or not. I assume you do. And if you're like me, I've noticed in talking with them over the years, there's a wide variety of ways that people try to understand or think they understand how to handle the word of truth. And I don't know what you think, but I think in my lifetime, there has never been more confusion than what there is right now in the world over matters of faith, matters of Christianity and spirituality. I have actually met someone a few years ago that actually believed in the Norse gods of old. And come to find out, he and his bride had a wedding with the costumes dressed as Norse gods, Thor, and all of this stuff. And it's just rather bizarre. And yet they believe it. Now, that sounds so strange to us, because where I grew up, just about everybody, they may not have been a member of the Lord's church, but they were a member of some kind of church, or they had a Bible in their home. And I'm talking about my school teachers, neighbors, family, friends. But it's not that way anymore. You can go to the internet and look at presentations of every kind of religion imaginable. And you'd be shocked at some of what you would see. Or maybe you wouldn't. But even small town America is no longer isolated from this issue. Am I making sense? It's everywhere. When I was a teenager, I couldn't turn on an internet feed and hear some crazy idea streaming across to me. If I wanted to see one of my favorite bands, I had to wait until they come to town. And then if I could earn the money to go, I could go. But even then, it wasn't as crazy as it is now, or as dangerous as it is now in some cases. I never remember anyone ever being in trouble in high school for bringing a gun. And yet you hear it now all the time. So we're in a world that's vastly different from the way it was when you and I were growing up. And not for the best, I'm afraid. So how do we handle the word of truth? A professor of mine, he used to have a saying, and he is now deceased, and I miss him greatly, but he used to say in class, he would say, all right, in this class, we're going to have this rule. You speak for you, I'll speak for me, and we'll let God speak for God. And we'll try our best not to confuse the three. And I like that saying. That makes perfect sense to me. One of the biggest problems is we get that confused. I can only speak for Tom Atkinson this morning. I can speak for no one else. And I assume you can speak for you. But God has spoken for himself. And it's